Today's subject is a woman whose voice could silence a room, whose presence transformed every frame she entered, and whose name became shorthand for excellence in acting. Meryl Streep. She was the woman Hollywood called, when it needed depth, grace, and devastating precision, a shapeshifter who moved from accents to eras with uncanny mastery. From Sophie's Choice to The Devil Wears Prada, Meryl didn't just play roles, she inhabited them. But behind the golden statues, record-breaking nominations, and standing ovations, her most enduring performance didn't unfold on a soundstage. It happened at home long before she became the high priestess of prestige cinema. Meryl Streep was a mother 4 times over. While the world studied her craft, her children studied her quiet discipline, her unshakable work ethic, and the way she always made time for dinner, no matter what studio needed her on set at dawn. She raised artists not by force, but by example, and watched as each one stepped onto their own stage, some in her footsteps, others into music or behind the scenes. There were no tabloid scandals, no red carpet stunts, just school plays, music lessons, and the rhythm of real family life, set to the backdrop of an extraordinary career. She wasn't a myth, not to them. She was mom fierce, funny, private, and profoundly grounded. This is the story of Meryl Streep and what happened to the 4 children of Hollywood's most revered leading lady. Henry Wolfe was born in 1979, the same year Meryl Streep filmed Kramer versus Kramer. He was the first to see her not as an icon, but as a young mother learning to carry greatness and grief at the same time. As her career soared through the 80s, Henry was the quiet witness, watching her vanish into characters by day and return home smelling of stage makeup and fatigue. He grew up in the periphery of her fame, close enough to feel the heat, distant enough to crave his own temperature. As a child, he saw how the world treated her like a goddess, but at home, he saw the strain, the perfectionism, the hyper-awareness, the quiet burden of being Meryl Streep. That duality shaped him. While she expressed emotion through acting, he sought refuge in music, less spotlight, more control. After graduating from Dartmouth in 2002, Henry founded an indie band, then moved into solo work defined by subtlety, restraint, and melancholy. His lyrics often hinted at yearning, at the tension of growing up around something massive but unreachable. He never publicly distanced himself from his mother, but he never capitalized on her name either. When Meryl made her bold political speech at the Golden Globes in 2017, Henry didn't defend or echo her. Instead, he released a Silomar, a quietly aching song that felt like both a retreat and a response. He once said that being her son meant understanding that attention isn't always a gift, it's a shadow that stretches, and yet from her, he inherited more than expectation. He inherited discipline, a quiet moral clarity, and the instinct to protect art from performance. Meryl taught the world how to speak truth through story. Henry listened and chose a softer voice, but the same truth. Mamie Gummer was born in 1983, at a time when Meryl Streep was already redefining what it meant to be a serious actress in Hollywood. Unlike her siblings, Mamie never knew a version of her mother that wasn't already legendary. From the beginning, she was tethered to that myth, first appearing alongside Meryl in Heartburn as a toddler, though her name was hidden in the credits. What began as protection would slowly evolve into the central tension of her adult life: how to be visible without being consumed by the name Streep. She studied theater at Northwestern, trained seriously, and threw herself into the stage with the kind of commitment that mirrored her mother's early years. By the mid-2000s, Mamie had built a yorasum that any young actress would envy. Off-Broadway acclaim, a Theater World Award, lead roles in The Good Wife and Emily Owens, MD. But no matter how skillful she was, the narrative never left her hands. She wasn't just Mamie. She was Meryl's daughter. The pressure didn't just come from the press. It lived in the family bones. Meryl's discipline, her relentless pursuit of emotional accuracy, set a standard that was both inspiring and impossible. At home, Mamie admired her mother's strength. On set, she inherited her mother's work ethic, but also her emotional rigor, her ability to bleed into a role. And when the industry exploded with the Me Too movement, Mamie found herself in an impossible position. Her mother's silence on Harvey Weinstein drew backlash. Mamie, a woman who had lived and worked in the very corridors that protected men like him, said nothing. Whether it was loyalty, fear, or exhaustion, she disappeared from headlines, but the weight remained. In 2019, she married writer Mehar Sethi and became a mother herself. For a moment, it seemed she had stepped out of the legacy and into her own story. But in 2025, she filed for divorce, quietly, without public explanation. In many ways, Mamie is the child who came closest to her mother's path and paid the highest emotional price for it. Every role, every marriage, every silence she kept was shaped not just by who Meryl Streep was, but by what it meant to be born inside a legacy that still expects perfection. Grace Gummer was born in May 1986, just as Meryl Streep was shifting into her most emotionally demanding period, fresh off Out of Africa, headed into A Cry in the Dark. Grace came into a world where her mother was no longer just admired, but revered from an early age. She sensed what it meant to orbit that kind of intensity. The meticulous preparation, the private rehearsals in the living room, the public adoration that followed Meryl everywhere. But Grace was never dazzled. She was analytical, composed, and sharp, more watcher than performer. As her older siblings leaned into either distance or tradition, Grace studied the rules and quietly planned her own disruption. After graduating from Vassar and later Yale School of Drama, she made her Broadway debut in 2011's Arcadia and quickly earned her own accolades. But she didn't chase prestige projects or obvious leads. She drifted toward the psychologically fraught, the quietly broken The Newsroom, Exton, American Horror Story, Mr. Robot. While Meryl specialized in empathy and elegance, Grace explored what happened when those things were absent, and yet the DNA was undeniable. Her voice carried that same measured cadence. Her presence, like Meryl's, could quiet a room. But Grace's defiance lay in choosing discomfort over likability, ambiguity over clarity. In 2019, as Meryl faced backlash for portraying a Latina woman in The Laundromat, Grace remained silent, not out of avoidance, but instinct. She understood the danger of defending or denouncing someone as symbolically large as Meryl Streep. Instead, she focused inward, quietly pulling back from the press while continuing her work. Her personal life, meanwhile, mirrored that same tension between form and vulnerability. A brief marriage to musician Tay Strathern ended almost immediately in 2019. 2 years later, she married producer Mark Ronson, a man who understood what it meant to be raised in someone else's shadow. Their first daughter was born in 2023. Their second in 2025 in motherhood, Grace found her own stage one without critics, one where lineage didn't overshadow presence. She never tried to correct the public's image of her mother, nor did she attempt to replicate it. Instead, Grace carved out space in the same industry by rejecting its symmetry. She is the child who saw Meryl Streep most clearly, flaws, fame, power, and all, and chose not to idolize or flee, but to reflect it back in a darker, stranger mirror. Louisa Jacobson was born in June 1991, at a time when Meryl Streep was already considered untouchable. 12 Oscar nominations deep, shifting from romantic leads to matriarchs without losing cultural relevance. Unlike her siblings, Louisa never saw her mother on the rise. She was born into the aftermath of greatness, into a home where awards lined shelves and scripts arrived in manila envelopes almost daily. But what separated Louisa wasn't just age, it was approach. Where Henry sought distance, Mamie sought reflection, and Grace sought inversion, Louisa sought invisibility. She rarely appeared in family photos published in magazines. She didn't attend public events. She didn't even use the name Gummer when she started acting. That wasn't a branding strategy, it was self-defense. At Vassar, she studied psychology, not performance, but the pull of narrative. The same pull that drove her mother found its way back. She enrolled at Yale School of Drama, like Meryl had decades earlier. She trained rigorously, keeping her lineage quiet. No interviews, no soft launches, just the work. When she landed the lead role in HBO's The Gilded Age in 2022, it wasn't handed to her. It was earned. Critics praised her restraint, her ability to command attention without force. And still, the shadow loomed. Interviews asked about Meryl headlines couldn't resist the comparison, but Louisa refused to play the part of daughter. She spoke instead about craft, about voice, about character. Then came the moment that redefined her public identity, not on stage, but off. In June 2024, on Meryl's 75th birthday, Louisa came out publicly as a lesbian and introduced her partner, photo producer Anna Blundell. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was symbolic. She honored her mother by telling her truth, and in doing so, took one bold step further than Meryl ever had publicly. In 2025, Louisa received the Human Rights Campaign's Visibility Award, not just for representation, but for navigating legacy without apology or spectacle. Unlike her mother, Louisa doesn't act to reflect the world back to itself. She acts to make space for herself, for others, for stories that don't come with statues. She is the quietest of Meryl's children, but perhaps the one whose choices mark the deepest transformation of that legacy, not by rejecting the name, but by never needing it to matter. One mother, four children. Henry Wolfe didn't perform, he composed, turning her intensity into melody. Mamie Gummer followed her footsteps, only to learn how heavy they truly were. Grace Gummer mirrored her complexity, not in imitation, but in defiance. And Louisa Jacobson, the quietest of them all, stepped forward with no surname, no headline, no demand, only her voice. And yet each of them found a way to reshape what they inherited into song, into silence, into nuance, into truth. They didn't live in her shadow, they learned to carry it together, apart, and on their own terms. If this story moved you and you want more true portraits of the children who grew up behind the curtain of fame, subscribe to Hidden Heirs. Your support brings these hidden lives into the light. Thanks for listening.